Now we talk about the act consequentialism. What really matters in consequentialism are the results of your actions, the consequence in other words. So utilitarians then think that what really matters about those consequences, by which we mean what is good and what is bad, is the amount of utility innate in those consequences. The more utility or usefulness or happiness or goodness, and the less pain and suffering, the better. But that's a very general view because when dealing with happiness and suffering as a result of actions, it's important to look at the who, not just the what. Whose happiness and suffering are we talking about here? The victim? The moral agent? All people? And are all equal? So in consequentialist ethics, the general way to live the right and good way is by seeking to maximize the good and thus pleasure in some abstract way for someone via ethical moral actions. But how does one do that? So one major strategy for doing that is what we call the act consequentialism. In act consequentialism in this school, an agent's moral action is right if and only if it produces at least as much happiness as another choice that agent could have chosen. And in a consequentialism, the direct form of utilitarianism, great attention and effort must be paid to directly maximizing the good out of a specific decision-making situation. So in a consequentialism, both the consequences of an action and the people who would be impacted by the action matter. The goal is not to choose just the option that produces the most overall happiness, statistically speaking, but the option that offers up the best consequences within what situation for the people involved. And which people we mean here? All people. Because act consequentialism is about both the outcome as well as the people involved, this ethical approach tends to create situations that have emotional resonance. So by its nature, because compassion and thinking about others is involved, act consequentialism is not impartial like the other forms of utilitarianism or consequentialism. But in order to determine which action is the best for people, a series of procedures in order have to be logically and carefully worked through. So first, you must determine all of the possible options so that you can see all of your choices in front of you and compare and contrast them. This way, you will see which produces the maximum amount of good or utility. And then second, pick the choice with a higher number of positive utility units. A lot of ethical principles are, for lack of a better word, self-absorbed. Many seem to ask some variation of the questions, how can I live a better life? Am I doing the right things? Does my ability to reason determine whether or not I make an ethical decision? Those questions are indeed important to ask in the study and in the practice of ethics, but enough about me and what about other people? So in altruism, the good of others is the rightful end of a moral action. Specifically, an action is morally right only if the result or consequences of the action are more favorable than not to anyone and everyone except the agent. So the good of others is the true and rightful end then of any moral action. So ethical altruism is consequence-minded and oriented. This philosophy judges that the best moral acts are the ones that lead to the most happiness for others, but only others. So French philosopher Auguste Comte was the founder of positivism, a doctrine that was the opposite of egoism or the idea to pursue one's self-interest above all others. Whereas egoism dictates that humans operate out of their own best interest, Comte believed that humans should act for the good of others. He described the ethical doctrines behind positivism with the phrase live for others, as well as a term he coined altruism. In fact, altruism comes from the word alter, which in Latin means other, and so a good name for this philosophy could be otherism. So Comte and other altruists believed that a moral agent or the person has the obligation to further the pleasures and resolve the pain of others. So the doctrine of ethical altruism is almost completely about the consequences of actions and the resulting happiness of somebody else. The effect on the individual doesn't matter much at all. It qualifies as a utilitarian method of ethical practice because it focuses on the outcome of actions, not the intentions behind the actions. However, problems encountered with ethical altruism said that critics have brought up the argument that altruism considers the happiness of others to be the ultimate end, but altruism completely dismisses the idea of individual, self-created, or self-directed happiness. Therein lies the problem. If there is no moral imperative to create happiness for yourself, why should anyone else be inclined to promote your happiness? So there's also the happiness subjectivity problem. Moreover, the moral agent is the one in charge of the happiness of another. But should he be? Does he have the right to determine and act for someone else's happiness? Acting on behalf of someone else's humanity and happiness is theoretically good, but in practice the idea falls apart if the agent and beneficiary don't see eye to eye on how to help. So when it comes to the criticisms of consequentialist ethics, we take note of the following. Personal rights and justice are not as important in consequentialism as they are in other philosophical schools. This is because consequentialism favors, well, the best consequences. It's far too idealistic to use this all the time. And even according to philosopher Bernard Williams, he argued that the consequentialist theory of utilitarianism robs people of their unique, individual moral outlooks by making them follow a finite and narrow system, and to do so is to rob people of their independence, reasoning skills, and other things that make them inherently human. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have learned a lot from this lesson.